It's a bit weird how we have 3 different versions of Ys 4, and only the most recent version titled Memories of Salsetta is considered canon nowadays. The other 2 games that predate it were actually not developed by Falcom exclusively. They were developed by Tonkin House and Hudson Soft. The game we are looking at today is Ys 4 The Dawn of Ys for the PC Engine Super CD-ROM, which is the Hudson Soft version of Ys 4, which is a completely different take on the events of Mask of the Sun. Ys 4 The Dawn of Ys feels more like a homage to the first entry in the series, and focuses on improving the formula of the first 2 entries, those being the duology of Book 1 and 2 that released together on the PC Engine CD-ROM. The game feels like a huge love letter to fans of the first 2 games, while also opening up a whole new adventure for Adol, and what a fantastic adventure this one is. Dawn of Ys offers a much greater variety of locations, and a lot more story than the previous entries, making it feel a lot more substantial by comparison in regards to its overall world design, and this makes the adventure so much more memorable by comparison, as it feels like the total package, while I found that the previous entries left me wanting more, as they felt either rushed or cut short. Then again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, and given the fact that Dawn of Ys offers more, it will require a little bit more time investment than the previous entries, though I don't feel that the game ever overstays its welcome, as I felt that the length of this game was just right, not too long, not too short. There's a plethora of dungeons and towns to explore, as well as cutscenes which are sadly only voiced in Japanese with no subtitles, so even if you're playing the game with the fan translation, you're going to have a tough time understanding what is going on in these cutscenes unless you know Japanese, since this game never released outside of Japan. On the plus side, these cutscenes are usually accompanied with some fantastic anime artwork that showcases what is arguably the best in the Ys series. If you are a sucker for 90s anime artwork, you've found the perfect game with Ys 4 The Dawn of Ys, as its artwork is so unapologetically 90s, it's brilliant. Not to mention the most important part, which is the music. Oh my god, is this soundtrack hands down the best video game soundtrack of the 90s, without a doubt. The music in this game is on a whole other level. Needless to say, the PC Engine CD plays a huge part in this, as it allows for Red Book audio, but my god, does Ryo Yonemitsu take full advantage of that to deliver one of the most incredible arrangements of a video game soundtrack ever. One thing I like about this game's soundtrack in particular is the use of the saxophone, as it accompanies the rest of the music surprisingly well, and is definitely the biggest standout if you ask me. Of course, there's plenty of synthesizer and rock in there too, just like the previous entries, so the saxophone is just the icing on the cake. I actually listen to this game's soundtrack rather frequently, usually when I fancy some background music while working on something, or simply wanting to relax. Dawn of Ys is often the first port of call. While the anime artwork is an improvement, the in-game graphics are completely unchanged from Book 1 and 2, which doesn't hold up as well for a game released in 1993, as games like Secret of Mana look so much better by comparison. The standard music in the game is purely chiptune also, though I found it to be decent enough. It obviously gets overshadowed by the Red Book tracks. With this in mind, Ys 4 The Dawn of Ys feels dated in some areas, and it's important to be aware of that before jumping in. The combat is mostly the same as Ys Book 2, but with a few alterations. First of all, you can now move diagonally on the field, which means that you can do diagonal bumps as opposed to just straight ones. You can use magic to help you defeat some of these foes, and that includes a charge shot for your fireballs to hit multiple enemies at once. I do feel that the overall difficulty of the game feels more balanced, as the bosses are considerably more manageable than they were in Ys Book 2, with a few exceptions. There are some tough sections, but nothing that made me too frustrated. The dungeons, much like in Ys Book 1 and 2, can be rather confusing to navigate at times. Some of them can be a real pain in the arse to get through, with some irritating gimmicks, like flames you have to avoid that will kill you in seconds. It should also be noted that the rings from previous entries return here, and operate in a similar fashion, but without the ring power cost from Ys 3 Wanderers of Ys, as well as many of the spells from Ys 2, with a couple of new ones thrown into the mix. With all this in mind, it's not too different from its predecessors, and is really just more of the same, with a few minor improvements to refine the overall experience. Narratively speaking, it's not too much different from the other 2 versions of Ys 4, but I feel that Dawn of Ys expands on the narrative a little more than Memories of Salsetta does, by adding more backstory to flesh things out. It should also be noted that the primary antagonist of Dawn of Ys is completely different this time around, and doesn't even show up at all in the other versions of Ys 4, making them an original character. I personally consider Dawn of Ys to be the definitive Ys 4 experience, narratively speaking, as while it isn't canon anymore, it feels like the perfect finale to a trilogy of games, because this was, after all, the final Ys game developed by Hudson Soft, and they really gave it their all, as it was their swan song. Therefore, I feel that there's a lot more to love about this version of Ys 4, as it feels like the most definitive and complete of the bunch. Despite this, however, Dawn of Ys is considered non-canon, so none of the additional lore truly applies to the newer games in the series. Nevertheless, I still think it's worth experiencing what was. After all, there's a lot of cases where lore in video games has been changed for the worse. Just look at Warcraft, for example. While I can't say I dislike the canon Ys storyline, I definitely think there's value in experiencing this take on the events of Ys 4. I personally like to consider it a multiverse, which is fitting given the fact that the Ys games are a retelling of Adol's journey, so it makes sense that there would be alternate variations of his story. In fact, one might argue that these storylines are designed to sound more fantastical than they really are, and that Adol was merely on a sightseeing tour around the world, transforming his long vacation into a heroic journey for the reader's entertainment. This is my personal belief, especially after playing through Lacrimosa with Dana, since that story was completely nuts. There's no way any of that shit was true. I refuse to believe it. Does it make for an epic tale of heroics though? Absolutely. Ys 4 The Dawn of Ys is a truly special game that every Ys fan needs to experience at least once. It is best described as being the ultimate time capsule from the 90s. I think this game definitely deserves more attention and should be celebrated as being one of the best Ys games of all time, because even though newer Ys entries have arguably superior graphics and combat, there's so much to love about this game that you absolutely cannot pass up on. Ys 4 The Dawn of Ys is more than just a game, it's an experience that you will never forget.